So, what are we going to do today? As always, every single month we have a new challenge with a new data set. Same rules, but different data set. And whatever we do every single month is we go through the data set, we talk about the data set a little bit, we talk about certain visuals that might be used during this use case, and of course, we answer your questions. So, if you do have any questions, if you have any ideas that you want me to take a look at, go ahead and write it in the comments. I'll try to go through those as fast as possible and as much as possible, ideally all of them, but time is time, can't always make everything happen. But one thing that I can definitely encourage you to do is, if you do have any questions, if you run into any issues or anything, feel free to reach out to our team at webinars@zoomcharts.com. So send in your questions, send in your cases, so we can take a closer look at it and come back to you with comments on the case, maybe something we can do easily on our side, maybe it's a bug, because you never know, right? There's millions of edge cases that can happen. So the more we find out about our visuals as well, the more use cases we see, the better for us as well. So yeah, this month what we're going to be doing is we're going to be analyzing crime data set. So this is for Washington D.C. uh, the crimes itself, as far as I understand, are actually relevant. So they're not completely randomized, they're actual data that's coming from an actual data set. Of course, they're completely de-anonymized, so no idea who did what or who was involved and so forth, but it's just purely statistical analysis on what type of crimes, the severity of the crimes, and so forth. So yeah, for those of you who are new, welcome. I hope to see your submissions as well. It's very fun to see how people progress through the challenges, but it's also very fun to see new people come in and showcase their very first reports. Because one of the things that I can't encourage you enough to do is just try. The worst thing that can happen is what? You're not going to get into the top five? Well, okay, go for the next one. The main idea about these events, the whole environment, the whole ecosystem we're trying to create here is for you to have a place where you can play around with different data sets, different visuals, different approaches, see what other people are doing. Basically, have a place where you can just play around, right? There's no judgment here. You can just ask also for opinion. You can ask questions if you get stuck on something, because not a single person started off with Power BI just knowing how to do everything. So it's fine if you're struggling. It's fine if your first report doesn't look like something, from a visual gallery. That's completely okay. As long as you start somewhere and you progress with every single challenge, you learn something new. In my book, you're a winner. I hope that's the same clause in your book as well. All right, so let me share my screen. Let's take a closer look at the data set. So quickly, I'm gonna share the screen, making sure I share the right screen, right? Kind of important. So let's go ahead here and let's actually go into the Power Query. Perfect, I shared the whole screen so I don't have to worry about switching windows. So the first thing that I did is I of course modified the dictionary page itself on the Excel file, because this time we had it slightly differently. Usually we have it like this, where we have a column name and then we have a description. Whereas in this particular challenge, for example, if we go for Onyx challenges, March 25, and open it up, I think I already actually saved it. Yeah. Yeah. So I modified it. So what you had in original file is basically you had was a description. So shift description, block description, and so forth. So I modified it so it's a little bit easier for me to use it afterwards. And as always, I also load it into the data model. I can always get rid of it afterwards, but whilst I'm creating reports, I keep it there so I can quickly reference what field is what, mostly because I'm not familiar with the data set itself. I didn't generate it, I'm not working with it daily, so having a dictionary by hand is very useful. So that's one of the things that I did. The second thing is make sure you look at the type of data that you have in the data set. What I mean by this is, for example, if I go back here and I'm going to delete purposefully this particular step. So in that step, what it did is it played around with end date and start date. So what happened by default is you can see that Power BI recognized this because it had some null values. It also had some text in it. It didn't trigger that it's a date. It's a date and time basically. So for example, if I also go ahead and try to convert it into date and time, you can see also get some errors. Well, that's because what happens whenever you convert to different data types, by default, you're using your regional settings. You can adjust the regional settings under File, Options and Settings, and Report Settings, for example, or globally. But in other cases where, for example, I typically work with European data, right? That's the typical standard that I have my data in. So it doesn't make just any sense to switch it between every report. I do it occasionally, but it's not necessarily need doesn't necessarily needs to be done every single time. So what I do in some cases, and this might be helpful for some of you as well, is if you're getting these sort of errors, that's because we have different date formats. So in Europe we have month, day, year, or sorry, day, month, year. In US we have month, day, year. So it's a bit of a different logic there. So in order to convert these values into a date and time, but still make Power BI to be able to recognize it, you just highlight the columns that you want to convert. You can do this on every single column. That's what I actually would recommend to do in the beginning when you're learning things, just because in Latvian we have a set saying that repetition is the mother of knowledge. So the more times you do the same thing, the more familiar you get with it. In my case, I've kind of done it already hundreds of or even thousands of times, so I'm familiar with it. But essentially, what you do is you highlight the column. Let's also find the start date column. There we go, just so I don't have to do this twice. So once I have both of them highlighted, I right click, I go to change type, and instead of choosing date time, I use using locale. So what using locale allows you to do is to change the regional settings for that particular column or the way on how you read it. So you can see right here, right? It says text and automatically it detects that it's Latvian. So because text usually, if I'm from Latvia, comes in Latvian. So what I'm going to say is it's actually going to be a date and time. And this is the next important thing you need to pay attention to. Sample input values. This is the keyword for the locale. So you do not provide the locality on where you want the data to be rendered to, but you actually provide the locality of the input data. So how it's coming into your data set. So in my case, it's going to be English, and I need to find USA. Do. Let's quickly find it right here, United States. So date and time, English, United States. We know that it's United States because the data set is about Washington, D.C. So click OK, and you can see it converts without any issues. If I go back to the end date as well, where we had those issues, I don't have any issues anymore. So that's one neat little trick that can help you from time to time to just adjust the data set based on regional settings, based on the locality of your data set. And if you're working with different data sets from different regions, you can do this in Power Query, or you can also do this, like I said, on report settings. So if you want to do this on report settings, you can go to your Power BI file itself, file right here in the top left. Then you go for options and settings, options. Let's open it quickly up. Report settings. Oh, sorry, not report settings, but we need to regional settings. I'm a bit slow today. Sorry, guys. I'm a little bit under the weather, so I could be a little bit slow. So here you can see locale for import, and I can adjust this on per report basis as well. But if you know that only some columns are going to be affected, you don't need to change the currency or anything like that. So that's all fine. Pick one which works faster for you. Nikechi already mentioned, for example, Power very fast from. Yeah, I agree. Power Query is very fast, especially if you get used to it. It just works and you don't have to worry about it, and it's easily replicable. And if you need to change it or you accidentally, for example, it shows the wrong locality, remember that not all steps, but most of the steps where you're going to have some sort of a model window popping on, you're going to have the possibility of modifying it afterwards. So do we have the same change type with locale? We can click on it and adjust the modifications that we did right here so I could switch to something else. Because the most common mistake here is, I remember I was doing it the same when I started off, is I just ignored this, right? I thought that, okay, that's just a sample. So I was always providing the locality where I wanted things to be transferred to rather than the one that it's coming in. So that's another thing. Other than that, just familiarize with yourself with the data set, right? Look at the dictionary, for example. That's what usually I do. Looking at the raw data helps me to, for example, just understand, okay, how different the data is going to be, how much of textual data we have, how much numerical data we have, and so forth. Remember, we do have these column profiles and column qualities. So we could click, for example, on a column and see the distribution and things like that. So before I even go into the reporting part of things, I just look at the data and familiarize myself with it. And the dictionary is a very helpful tool because it helps you to understand. Because otherwise, if it's your first time looking at the data set, well, this is the ANC column. Cool. Could mean anything. So looking at the dictionary, we find ANC, advisory neighborhood commission ID. If I'm going to be using it, keep it. If I'm not going to be using it, just delete it from the data set as all. As just no need for that column. Because the one thing you also want to do is you want to get rid of anything that you're not going to be using. There's no need for data replication if you already have it in some other way, shape, or form. A good example of this is, for example, we can see there's a column for location, which is basically if we go to the dictionary, location, geographical coordinates, and latitude and longitude format. So we have a location, but if you look at the data set, we actually have the latitude. And at the end of the data set, we also, here in the middle, we also had the longitude. So you can look at these values. See, they're exactly the same. That's the first part. That's the second part. So it's exactly the same information. So pretty much location is an unneeded variable in this case. We already have the split version for it. So there's no need for you to have a combined version of the same thing. You're just consuming more resources to render all these things and work through them. Same approach goes for everything else. If you know that there are certain things that you're not going to be working, just ignore them, delete them, or hide them temporarily. That's what I also sometimes do if I don't know if I'm going to be using it or not. But most of the time, just delete it if it's unnecessary. Um, Going forward, most of the other changes I did in Power BI already. So I'm just going to discard the changes because I didn't really do anything. I just added those additional steps with the locality change and deleted some columns. Now, when it comes to the report, few things that I started to play around or notice, right? The first reason why I even wanted to showcase that switch between the locality is because one of the metrics that I wanted to calculate is the average resolve time. Because in the data set, if we take a look at the dictionary, we have a start date. Where is it? There we go, right next to each other. So start date is the date and time the crime occurred. So that's basically the time when this particular crime took place. And the end date is when it was resolved or closed, right? Whether there is a resolvement or not, that's a different thing, but the case is closed. So these two variables allow me to understand, okay, how on typically average timeline, how long does it take for a case to be closed? So that's what I wanted to calculate. Since these are two different columns, what I did is I used an average X because I wanted it to be able to calculate things on a row level basis. Remember, X functions basically allow you to provide an expression and create an expression for every single row and then do something with that value. So in my case, I wanted to create a date difference on a row level basis. I wanted to take away from the start date, the end date, and convert it into days and do this on every single row and just take out the average from all of them depending on the context that I'm providing to the user. In this case, it's just going through every single row in the data set. And of course, you can play around with the unit itself. In my case, I left it on days. But the cool thing about this is since it's just a formula, you can just choose whether it's hours, minutes, months, probably not months, because if you leave it on days, right, and if we look at the value, you can see that the average for the whole data set is 0.82. So there's pretty much maybe few of them, but most of them don't even go above 1 day, right? So going into months would be like 0.0002. So there's no need for that. So that allows you to understand the logic behind it. But yeah, the reason why I wanted to talk about the date and time component on how to convert those with the locality is because initially this measure was giving me error and I just couldn't figure out what was happening until I realized that going into transform data that the columns were actually being rendered as text. And of course makes sense. You can't really, subtract date text from another date text. It's just text. What do you want me to do? So converting into date works properly. So that's one of the things that I did. The other thing is I wanted to also understand how many crimes are there in total. So of course I go back to the data dictionary, I take a closer look at it, And one of the things that I found is, okay, we actually do have a column, Octa record ID, unique identifier for the record and the dataset, meaning that that's the entry ID for this particular crime. Cool. What I do just intuitively, right, is I go ahead, I just read that there's a column in the dataset that has the unique identifier. I haven't checked the data itself yet, but like I said, the first thought is I'm just going to create a measure if Power BI decides to allow me to do this. Let's just patiently wait. Come on, my friend. I know it's a live demo, right? We've all been there when we have to showcase something, and it's just gonna be like, you know what? Nah, I'm good. I'm just gonna let you struggle with it a little bit. Let's see. Can I get it unstuck, please? No, no, it's not gonna responding soon. All right, back to the drawing board. Let's open up a previous version that I saved at 10 o'clock. Cool. Another tip, save your reports more often than I do, right? It can help you in certain situations like this, for example. I'm going to leave it in back, just maybe it comes back to life. Other than that, we're going to be using an older version of the report. Okay. As you can see, I don't have a lot of calculations here, but that's okay. We can also do this on the fly. That's the main idea about this, right? We showcase you how to do it. So yeah, crime count isn't even here. All right. So what I would do is I would create a measure to provide me with the ability to see how many crimes are there in total. Yeah, Alexis, there is going to be a recording. Every single session that we have is recorded, and after the webinar ends, you're going to have the ability to get the recording in your email, so you can rewatch it whenever you have the time. All right. So crime count is distinct count. Why distinct? Because I want to make sure that I exclude if any of the case IDs are repetitive, right? Did they have duplicate values? So I want to count the distinct values. And the column that I was looking for is Octo record ID. Okay, Octo record ID. Perfect. Distinct count. Nothing complex there. Have a card. Just take a look at the value, and I see that the crime count is 1. Which feels weird because if you look at the data, there's definitely more than one row, right? And already from this data, we can see that those are different crimes happening. These are not in the same location, completely different codes and everything. So what's the deal? Well, let's take a closer look at the data. And if we look at the data and find the octa record ID, we can actually see that the only value it has is blank. So we can't really have that as a distinct count. There's just going to be one value. So what I did in my case is I was looking at the data dictionary to, for example, quickly find anything else that would allow me to distinguish between the different crimes, whether they're duplicates or not, because I don't necessarily know it, but I couldn't find really anything. There's different IDs for different categories of crimes and so forth, but not a single unique identifier for the crime itself. So since this is a mock data set and this is a challenge, right? I did the easiest route or the easiest escape I could think about. And that was going into the Power Query, going into your data, and I just added a column which is an index column. So the way I'm treating this now is basically every single row is a new crime. Whether or not this is true, I don't know, but I'm ready to gamble this because I don't have any other unique identifiers. I mean, theoretically, you could combine a lot of different columns and try to distinguish whether or not they're the same crime or not. But in this case, I just went with the index column. In reality, of course, you would have to think about the best solution on how to approach this and everything. As a challenge report, we're kind of okay with you just playing around with different ideas. So now that we have the index column, all I'm going to do is just switch the column from octo to index, and we can see in total there's 3.8k crimes happening. We can adjust the format So we have the thousand separator. I want to make sure that this is a whole number. So sometimes when you do the calculations, it's going to give you something like a decimal number, for example, with two decimal values. But a crime is a crime, right? You can't have half of the crime. So you want to make sure you force this always to be a whole number with zero decimals. So you see the whole numbers. So those were the two metrics that I had initially. Then afterwards, we had the map visual. So for the map visual, what I did is I was using our map visual, so drill down map pro. I provided the latitude and longitude since it's something that we have in the dataset. Afterwards, there's nothing else that I did here initially because these are the only two mandatory things. And now basically the value that you see on top of the node is the amount of times the particular location with the longitude and latitude has been visible in the dataset. Because unless you provide a value, that's the only thing it can count, right? The unique combinations of long lat. But since we have the crime count now, I can use that as my value driver. Cool. I can see these bubbles and see that, some of them are overlapping. It's not really something I want to do. So I would go to node settings, cluster node distance, and increase this to maybe 70. Let's try that. Okay, looks a little bit better. I don't like the colors itself. So I'm gonna switch it to something like dark gray, for example. So just so it's a little bit easier to notice. So I'm gonna be keeping it like this. You can of course play around with the values again. If you don't want any display units or shortenings being applied. So for example, we can see it's a full number, so no shortening applied. Here we have 2K, which is a shortening. If you don't want that to happen, you can of course go ahead and adjust this and say that if you want these or if you don't want these, it's completely up to you. So that's just something that I wanted you to know as well. So we have these values. These ones are sitting now a lot better. And if we get closer to the map, you already know about this behavior. We split down into more and more detailed circles. So all of this is based on proximity. Um, by creating the initial map, one other thing that I modified is just going to reset it to default. Yeah, perfect. So without adjusting anything in the base model, this is where my map was getting stuck on. The reason for this is because if we go under the base layer settings of the map visual, we can see there's a property called max autofocus zoom. So what this means is that's the maximum level of zoom that a visual can apply before it stops itself. In my case, since I'm talking just about a single city, that's not really applicable, right? Because you can see I'm pretty far away from the city. So what I can do is two things. First of all, go to toolbar and enable this zoom number. The only reason why you want to have it is just so you know which level of the zoom you are currently on. You can disable it afterwards for the end user. There's no benefit for the end user for this because they don't care about which level they are on. But for you as a developer, this is a very important information when you're customizing the visual. So we can see right here, level 6. As you can see, every single zoom in increases the level. So I try to find something that looks okay. We could go down to 12, but then you can see the borderlines of things are getting sort of cut off. It's not ideal. So I'm going to stick with 11. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and say that the max zoom level is going to be 11. Or I can even say that the minimum zoom is going to be 11. The difference is going to be this. So max autofocus zoom, if I now switch between the pages, you can see that's the zoom level that I'm currently at. If I, for example, decide to go for, let's go for a sector, for example, and if I choose one of them, you can see I'm always on level 11, right? I'm moving around the map, but I'm keeping the zoom level because I defined that that's the maximum zoom. Whereas the difference between these, if I, for example, set this at something like 16, but I say that the minimum zoom is going to be 11, what I'm doing is I'm not allowing the user to get further away from the map. He can still try to use the minus button or the scroll wheel. Nothing's going to happen. He can zoom in closer, but he can't get away from it. So based on your use case, you can see now, because I set it at 16, the chart is able to also get a little bit closer to the necessary information. So one thing that I would just recommend is play around with your data. And this is one of the most important features of every single report build. Play around with the visuals, play around with the data, see how they cross interact. Because, just putting everything together, that's not art. You can easily do that. There's no skill needed for that. But creating a report that tells a story is something that you have to invest time in. So play around with your data. That's one thing that I can definitely recommend. But yeah, where was I? I had it set it at 11 minimum. Yeah, I don't want to get closer. If the user wants to get closer, he has to zoom in manually. That's the way I'm gonna create it. Was it ideal? Maybe not, but that's what I'm gonna go for. So we got that part. The second thing is I want to be able to sometimes maybe also see some sort of a split on these clusters. Because one of the capabilities that our map visual supports is the ability to showcase slices or basically a donut chart on top of the node, showcasing the different split of a category. So, for example, if we go for something like shift, I think there are 4 different shift types. I could go ahead and add this to the category. Initially, you can see nothing changes. That's because you need to go under formatting options, node settings, scroll down, and enable this pie charts and nodes. So this now allows me to see the split between the different shift types. So evening, day, midnight, so we can see which one is the most prominent one in each sector. Again, I can see they're kind of overlapping here. I don't really like it. So I can play around with it, for example, either again, the clustering distance, for example, increase it to 90. Or if you liked how this looks, so I like that level of detail here, but I don't like the overlap, play around a bit with the radius. So for example, switch it to something like 20. So you increase the maximum radius of one particular cluster. If you don't like the numbers itself, because you can see they're kind of small, kind of hard to read, for example. So by default, the values are always going to be inside the bubble, right? The node itself. And it just makes sense that, well, the label kind of has to fit in that node. Otherwise, what's the point of a node? So in order to kind of work around this, one of the things that you can do is you can go under node settings, find value label position, and say that it's going to be outside. So now you can see these have a designated space and they're all going to be the same size. Now we can see, okay, maybe I have a little bit of an overlap, but if you're okay with it, this might be even better than holding the values inside of a node and just kind of restricting the user's visibility. So the most important thing is play around. Nothing comes easily at first. Trust me, it's always a little bit tricky. So you have the ability to also showcase, for example, the category as a donut slice, but I also know from a data set, if I take a look at it, for example, we have the sector, which defines the sector where the crime is located. We can also see things like offense, the type of crime committed, the shift that we just used. There's also offense key or offense text, I think was something like that. So different columns that could be represented, for example, within my charts. So what I'm going to do is, some of you already know how to do this. For those who are new, field parameters, an amazing feature that Power BI allows you to do. And we, of course, support that in our visuals as well. So I could go for something like, let's say, let's go with method, offense group, offense itself. Maybe there's a difference, maybe there's not. I don't know exactly. Let's go with these 4. So these 4 categories. And I'm going to get a slicer like this. So what this slicer actually represents is the new table that was created in my file called parameter. You can, of course, rename this, but I'm just going with the default setup. So if I go ahead and now add this parameter in my category rather than a specific category, you can see that sometimes what happens is you get this view where you just have all 4 categories and they're all exactly the same. So you need to go under the parameter right here and switch to show values of selected field rather than the selected field itself. So if you enable this, what you can see is I have a parameter, which basically works as a switch now. So I can switch between the method. So that's the split based on a method. I can switch between offense groups. I can switch between the shifts. So you're giving the user basically the ability to switch between the split or the variation of the split. And the cool thing about this is that this can be used as a basically um, a synchronized switch between multiple visuals. So for example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert this into a tile just so it kind of represents buttons a bit more. I'm going to make it more narrow. The location of visuals and so forth, don't pay too much attention to it since I'm just playing around with things. Ideally, of course, you just don't want to throw things randomly. But for me, it's all about showcasing samples. So then I'm going to go with a timeline. So for the timeline, what you need is you need a hierarchy and you need a date. If we remember, we have two different dates in our dataset. We could analyze things based on the closing time, so we can see at which times of the day, or not part of the day, but for example, at what time of the day was the case closed and so forth, or when it was committed. So my case, I'm gonna go with the start date. So I'm just dragging in the date field into the hierarchy. I'm using the same date field on the x-axis, and I'm gonna be using my crime count as a series one. So series one is the numerical value. Cool. From the data that's available, we can see that we have some anomalies. We have one crime registered, or because there was no date, it's registered in 1989. Then there's one in 2005. There's one in 2022. There's 117 2024, but most of them are in 2025. We don't limit how you work with the data set. So you could easily just name the report crime analytics for 2025. And this is what I did in my case as well. And just go ahead for the year filter, basic filters, and just say the data is going to be regarding 2025. Cool. Going to quickly switch between the pages, allow the chart to load in. Since we have just one particular year, I think every one of you is going to agree that this chart just looks flawless, right? Just perfect, massive column, no, just taking space. Let's be honest, right? It might happen in some cases, but it's not ideal first view that you want to see for your data. Now, what I wanted to understand is how deep does the data go? So I'm going to be using the display units. If I go to quarters, I can see, okay, all the crimes that I have in the dataset are still in first quarter. Not ideal. Months. Okay, we have at least 2 months. That's something. But then we can switch to days. Okay, this provides me with a lot more information. But if I switch between the pages, this resets back to years. That's because what the chart does by default is uses the logic that the top level of the hierarchy that you have is the one that the chart is going to be using by default. Because this is called the drill down timeline pro visual. So if you open up the store, just type in timeline pro. It's going to be this one. So like I said, by default, it's taking the highest level of the hierarchy. Now, I could theoretically delete some of the levels of the hierarchy, but you know how it is with data, right? You don't have the necessary data currently, but this report might evolve. So I might be using the same report for months coming up front. So I don't want to lose the ability for the user to go up and down if he wants to, but I don't want him to also start here. Just seems weird because would have to click on 2025, then January, which is basically 2, 3 unnecessary steps, right? So what do I do? What I do is quite simple. I go into the formatting options of the visual. I find a property called, or the setting tab called initial display unit. And right here, you can see this is the default top. If you switch to custom, you can just say, hey, I want to use days. Okay, I forgot to apply a theme file. I'm going to be using a trial, but just to avoid this in the future, let's quickly browse for a theme, apply a license, just so I don't have to worry about that window ever again. Or actually, let's apply this. There we go. So a little bit more traditional styling that we have for ZoomCharts. All right, so formatting options, initial display unit, custom, and just enable the one unit that you want to be used by default. And in my case, that's day. So if I switch between the pages, or if I open up the report, you can see the report is on daily level. Cool. And you still have the ability to zoom out, for example, to monthly view, to quarterly view, to yearly view, and so forth. But that's not the entry point that I want for the user. I want the user to be able to just open up the report and actually see sensible data rather than just some randomized data, right? Well, it's not necessarily randomized, it's just that you create two additional levels of drill down, which add no value to the user whatsoever. If you want to see the total for the whole year, here you go. That's why you have this number. If you want to select just a particular time period, well, go ahead and create a selection on the timeline. That's going to cross filter everything. So just pay attention to that as well. In our case, one thing that I would recommend to do just to kind of play around or test your skills or train new things a little bit more, you can see that the type itself is date and time, but we're not talking using the time component anywhere. So what I could actually do is the following. I'm going to go back to the Power Query. Then we're going to go ahead, go to the main data. Since I'm using everything from start date, if you're lazy to find a column or you just want to be efficient, view, go to column to find the right column. There we go. So we have this one. Cool. I'm going to go ahead and choose add column, choose start date, and then I'm going to bring out two components. I need the hour, back to start date, and I need the minute. Cool. And I'm going to show you in a second why I need this. So the timeline visual supports both granularities, date and time. The only trick here is you need to make sure that all the necessary information is provided. If you look at the hierarchy, you can see the hierarchy ends at day. So there's no reason for the visual to go deeper. So for example, if you click on one of the days, you can see it selects it, but it doesn't go deeper. That's because you clearly said that day is the last level of the hierarchy. If we create those hours and minutes, we're going to find them right here. So hour, bring that in. Also find the minute. There we go. Then make sure, always make sure, that the field you're using in the x-axis is of type date and time. Because if you're going to force this to be only date, you lose the time component. So you need to make sure it's date and time. Now that we have the hours and the minutes, if I click on one of the days, you can see I drill down into hourly view. If I click on one of the hours, I go into the minute view, basically. So you can play around with these different views and choose which one is more interesting for you. So that's something you can also do with our visuals. So what's next? Oh yeah, the parameter field that we created. Why I'm saying that there could be a unified switch for everything. So we have this parameter, right? Remember? Offset groups, offense, shift, and so forth. So what I can do is actually go, for example, for the same timeline visual, find a property called legend, and that's where I'm going to be using my parameter. Just make sure that you also switch to show values of selected field. So now, if I switch between these, you can see the same thing happens on the map and on the timeline. So I'm switching between the groups and it's redrawing based on the granularity. The only thing that I would recommend to do here is clustering is a good comparison feature. But if you just want to understand the overall structure, because you can see, for example, some of these are, you're comparing basically 1 against 75. It's pretty impossible to visually compare those. So what I would probably do is I just would create a stack rather than a cluster. So for that, I would go under the series defaults and switch to stacked. And I think you're going to agree with me that this just looks a lot better than to have that individual split for everything. Okay. So we have this, and one thing I also wanted to create when I was playing around with this is I remember seeing a column from the dictionary, which was where it was. I'll find it. I swear to God, I'll find it. Was it? Oh, this one, UCR rank. Basically indicates the severity of the crime. So I wanted to see also the crimes based on severity. We could use that as a field parameter, but for this case, I wanted to specifically separate it as a combo visual. So let's create a combo right here. Let's find the USCR rank. That's going to be my category. I'm going to be using again the same crime count. Nothing fancy, just going with the logic. I could, of course, keep it like this, but the one most important thing that I would always recommend is think about the story you're telling. Sure, this visual allows me to clearly see which is the highest point or the crime rating with the highest, crime count. Get it? But if there is some sort of a logic to the categories, I usually would recommend to sort them in that logic. So, for example, we have the severity, right? Here we see things going from 6 to 7 to 8 to 4 to 5 to 3 to 1 to 2 to 9, just all across the board. So, what I would probably do is change the sorting ascending. So starting from 1 up to 9, because every single time I open up the report, I know exactly where each of those categories is going to be located, where basically the severity is going to be located. Otherwise, it might be the first, it might be the last, it might be somewhere in the middle. You give more questions than answers to the users. And again, we have the parameter, use that as a legend, switch between the selected fields, convert into a stack chart rather than a clustered. And ideally, this is what happened to me previously as well. It's just pure luck. But because I got into this view, you can see that the parameter uses a fence. Whereas on the severity scale, we can see that every single value, there's just one particular value in each of those. There's not a combination, like, for example, in the timeline. One other thing you can see is in the tooltip, there's a lot of unnecessary points. So what you can do is go to the tooltip settings and tooltip settings, custom tooltips. Why am I missing this? Oh, because that's the flaw of using development visuals sometimes. You don't see things that were tested out previously and you're working with test data. So in the app source version, you're gonna have this property as well called hide rows with no data. This just means that whenever you hover over a value, you can see everything else is hidden. By default, this is disabled so that you can see all the categories that are within the chart. It seems weird in this case, but however, if I switch to something else, for example, method, you can see it still makes sense because you see both values, even though they're very small. For example, you can see here others is 893, but you can clearly see them. So that's something to keep in mind. Uh, enable this one back, go back to a fence. So what I was talking about is you can notice that each of these columns are essentially individual, right? There's no combination between them. So what you could do also from a user perspective is you could group them because severity corresponds to a crime. If you look at the severity, right, if you understand the severity criteria, it's easier for you to, for example, understand, okay, so this is going to be this type of crime. This is going to be this type of crime. However, if you don't know it, think about it like this, right? The severity rating is just a number. It doesn't tell you anything. However, the offense, which is a textual column, it tells you that these are motor vehicle thefts, these are arsons, these are theft which involved automobiles, this is theft with others. So it gives you textual information to describe what you are looking at. Sometimes less is more, but sometimes the more information you give to the user, the better, right? So one thing that I would recommend is just play around with these. See which one makes more sense, how you're going to be driving your story. You also can see, for example, that on offense group, there's violent and properly, I think, property. So I can also separate them that these four are for violent, these one are for property. So there are different ways on how you can work with already existing data. You don't have to work with only what's just given to you. You can add additional data if it's necessary. You can create your own columns. You can add additional data if you want to know something else. If you find something online that could help you enhance the data set, you're more than welcome to do that. We don't limit you in that case. Also, what you answer with the data set, we give you the general idea. Let me just quickly open up a browser. If we go into the challenge page, right here, this case, this is the Onyx data challenge. So if we go to the brief, you have few ideas that you can look into. You don't have to answer all of them. You can choose one of them. You can focus on two or three of them, or you can go completely different way. This is just suggested, right? You don't have to do everything that's mentioned here. Also these ones. You don't have to answer everything. It's completely up to you on what you answer and how you focus on it. As long as you create a good report that is compelling and does tell a story, you're more than welcome to go ahead. If you're just going to throw things together, maybe spend a little bit more time and create a story. Because a report where everything is answered usually ends up with a result where nothing really gets answered, right? Because you're kind of just glimpsing into everything but not focusing on anything. But yeah, that's one of the things. One thing though that I wanted to also talk about quickly, we do have a little bit of time, so I'm just going to very quickly go ahead and copy these two into a different page. And I want to talk about the difference between the timeline and the combo visual, because we had questions about it from the previous challenge, so I wanted to focus on it a bit more. So the timeline visual is a visual that already in the name kind of covers. It's meant for time-based data analytics. And because of it, there's a particular way on how you structure it. That's why you need to define the hierarchy and the x-axis, which is the date, and then you have all your values and everything, which sometimes might seem a little bit harder to do, but the added benefit of it is the way on how it interacts, right? So for example, if I wanted to create a continuous selection for a longer period, I can just hover over the x-axis and create that selection, and that issues a cross filter to everything else that's on the report. If I click on this highlighted section, it also allows me to drill down into that section into the next unit, in my case hours, which is already very granular. So I would probably do this if I wanted to focus on like 2, 3, 4, 5 days. But you can see there is the possibility to switch around. Whereas if I would go ahead and try to use the same logic also in a combo visual, let's say I'm going to be using the same date field, I can also add the same hours and minutes. Think about it as a categorical chart. So combo chart is specifically built for categorical data exploration, meaning there's no relationship between the categories, right? Those are individual categories that you're just showcasing. So there is no way to have a display unit switch because these are treated as categories. It has nothing to do with time. Just because it says 2025 doesn't mean it's a year, right? It's a unique value, it's a unique category, that's it. And if I wanted to drill down, I would have to do it one level at a time. So click on January, you can see we have, okay, there's cross-filtered information, but still, you can see these four, for example, days. If I wanted to go into a day, I can click on it, of course, and drill down into it. I can zoom out, but there's no way for me, for example, to create a continuous selection. Let's say these two dates. I can do it on that level, but there's no way for me to drill down into those 2 months, not months, but days. If I click on one of them, it's going to choose one of them, not the whole period. You can see it happening right here at the top. See, there's one day, there's 2 days now. If I click on this bar, sorry, column, I drill down into this segment. So the main difference between them is the data type. Timeline is specifically built for time and date based data analysis, whereas the combo is built for categorical information. That's where you put in your regions, your product categories. In this case, for example, offense types or severity as an example. So that sort of information. You can, of course, use combo as a timeline, but you're also losing a lot of the functionality that the timeline has built specifically for that visual. So just play around with the visuals. And if you get lost with the visuals and you just want to get a little bit more information, go to resources. Go to video tutorials or documentation. We have an extensive documentation, and we have a bunch of different videos where, for example, we can go how to set up Timeline Pro, right? You want to work with a combo visual topics, you can find combo and combo bar, and you can go through a series of videos. I look very exhausted. But you can go through a series of videos where I explain how to use the visual, what are the main features of the visual, how to set it up, how to utilize some of the interesting formatting options, and so forth. Not necessarily everything is covered, but it gives you a good base, right? So there's a bunch of different materials that you can utilize. Great experience. Not going to skew the data. But yeah, so that goes for that. What else? For the map visual, one thing you probably noticed here are these areas right here. So words. So whenever I see a map visual, if I just look at locations like this, I usually feel like, you know, that's it. I kind of want to have a bit more depth into it. So what I did is I found the GeoJSON that you can reference. So our visual allows you to reference external GeoJSONs. And I just found one online. And in this case, I found one for words. So I was looking at the information we have here. So you can see, for example, we have information actually about the word, city council district where crime occurred. Okay, let's go ahead and close Outlook. We didn't want to open it. Let's open up where it was the academy. So what I'm going to do is just say Washington words GeoJSON. And we can see, for example, one on GitHub right here. We can see different timelines, which is also something that's important because it allows you to understand whether or not it's going to be applicable or not. In my case, since it's just a sample, right, I'm not building the final report. This is just the idea. I get the GeoJSON link. I go to shape layers. I'm going to disable one and just go from scratch. So let's say I choose second. You can see by default it's built in shape. I'm going to switch it to GeoJSON. Here's the URL, paste it in, allow it to load. You can see it's covered in outlines and the fill color is in red. To kind of distinguish the outlines, just change the outline color as well. You can adjust the opacity or, make these areas, for example, that's not going to work. For example, something blue, whatever fits into the theme of your report, I would say. Use that one. And of course, if you want to add some conditional formatting on top of it, you can also do that. You can play around with the min and max fill colors. So a lot of different things that you can play around with. But yeah, one thing that I would definitely say is just don't grab the first one as I did right here. Look at the time and see maybe you have a better one. Because one thing I can tell you already, if you take the 2012 one, if you select a word, you have some crimes happening in other words as well, because probably the word boundaries have changed over time. So that's also important. But yeah, I want to also be able to answer some of your questions. So that's going to be it for me this time. As an example, I'm ready to go through the questions. I'm going to hide this one. All right. To calculate the crime rate, is the neighborhood's population needed considering the standard crime rate formula? Um, you can do that based on the standard formula. You can look up the neighborhood population or the ward population, depending on how detailed level you're going to be doing your analysis. If it's going to be sticking to the word system, go based on the word. If not, then go ahead and just go based on the total crime rate you have here and just say that, for example, that's the crime rate from total crimes happening in 2025. It depends on how you want to analyze this and showcase. But the one thing that I would just definitely do is make sure you do it on the same level as you have your data. So if you're calculating things on a word level, that the total population is calculated for the word, not the neighborhood or the sector. Could you please guide us about cleaning for data for better analysis? How much cleaning is necessary? It depends on how much analysis you're going to be doing or how complex analysis you're going to be doing. The one thing that you can already see, I started to do this, but I just didn't finish it because, I ran out of time a little bit. Is you have the fact table itself, and then you start to segment it into dimensions. So I started to create, for example, a geographical dimension, a crime dimension where there's only data regarding the crime itself. Don't look at this. This is not fully done. So I started to do it, but didn't finish it. Here I just removed anything that doesn't relate to the area itself, right? If there's anything that's correlated to the words or PSA or anything, I kept it here. So you could separate it and then connect it back to the data table. The way and how I do this, or one way and how you can easily do this, if you know that there's not going to be any more modifications on the original data source, you can just simply duplicate. If you know that you want to also take into account any modifications done to the original master data table, use reference. The main difference is that duplicate is just going to create a copy, right? That's just copy paste. Whereas reference keeps also always a connection between the original. So if there's a new calculation coming into the original table, it's also going to be transferred to your reference table, the new table that you create. So I'd say the main point would be separate your data into dimensions and facts, just to allow the report to work a little bit faster. Create a calendar table, that's also very important. In my case, yeah, I just did everything straight away, which isn't the greatest practice. It's okay for samples. What you did with some missing information, for example, column block group has some rows without value. So block group, go to block. Let's see how much information is actually missing. Okay, let's go for the total and data set. Distinct, unique. Like most of them have it. So we have in total 3.8k rows. We have just 4 of them missing. I would just write not applicable or undefined. If it would be something like 50% of the information is missing, so for 50% of the rows the information is missing, I would delete it. Worst case scenario, you can just delete these 4 entries. It's not ideal, but if you don't have any information to support it, you either get rid of the entries, or if that's not an option, you keep it in the system, but you clearly distinguish them by writing undefined, unspecified, or anything that allows you to quickly separate them. That's one of the troubleshooting mechanisms that we also do. Just provide an undefined, for example, value, so that whenever a new data comes in, you have a column that you use as an identifier, and you can see if you have any rows with the filter unidentified applied, it means there's some error in the database, and we need to fix that before we load in the new data. Is the shift field aligned with the time the crime is committed or the time the crime is resolved? Good question. Quick answer, no idea. But if we do a quick check, so shift, let's go for, what do we have? 3. Yeah, okay. Let's go with midnight. Let's go with start date. Let's put end date at one side. Let's put, where's the start date? I might be missing it. That's the end date, report date, start date. There we go. And come on, 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 come on. There we go. Let's see at the times. I would have to see the hourly distribution, but right now it seems that it's not connected to either. Or maybe, nah. Yeah, right now it doesn't seem like it's directly connected. Or the hourly splits are very big. What I would probably do is just create a chart that has the shift as one of the categories so you can see the split, and then create 2 separate charts, one focusing on the start date and time, one focusing on the end date and time. drill down to the level of hourly granularity, and then just choose one shift type to see how the hours are being split. That's probably how I would look at it. My question: does the drill down map all customized tooltips? If all customized tooltips, yes, can you go over it and show us, because we have tried it from my own hands. It isn't working. I'm not entirely sure what you were trying to do there, Marvelous. If you want to use, for example, something like a report page tooltip, we can definitely do it. That's supported feature of the visual. But the trick there is that you cannot reference a tooltip just to give you an idea, right? Let's go ahead and say that this page is going to be a tooltip page. Within it, there's going to be a donut chart showcasing the shift based on the crime count. Doesn't really matter what it is, just as an idea, right? Let's go back to the chart. Let's go ahead and say that the tooltip is going to be report page, page 3. If I hover over things like this, you can see it's not being called upon. Of course, it's not going to be called upon because you're not filtering out a particular value. So you're focusing on a cluster. A cluster is passing out multiple filters, and you can't issue a report page tooltip unless you know exactly what you're looking for. So in order to use this, I would have to be able to split down into individual values. So for example, say that the max clustering level is going to be 10. Now the chart looks terrible, just god awful, but it allows me to see the individual points. And if I hover over the individual point, I just need to make sure that the tooltip is being set to Power BI as well. If I hover over it, you can see the report page tooltip is being called upon. The main thing is you got to make sure that you're utilizing either our or Power BI tooltip. And if you're using Power BI tooltip, you need to switch it first here and then customize it from the tooltip segment. But if it's not a report page, just a default and some new background, that should be also working just fine. Yeah, there we go. So that's completely customizable. While analysis are we to follow what sorry. While analyzing are we to follow the procedure of prepare data, model data, visualize and analyze the data, deployment? Yeah, I'd say prepare the data, which involves cleaning and making sure you have all the necessary information. Then, once you have done the cleaning and everything, you create a data model. Once you've done create a data model, you also are more familiar with the data you're going to have. That's when you create the actual visuals. Of course, it's sometimes going back and forth between the second and the third step, because sometimes when you're creating a visual, you decide that you want to do something else. So you go back to the model step and add necessary columns, do some calculations, and so forth. And afterwards, it's just maintaining and deploying. Making sure that the updates don't break the report is a very crucial step. That's why in most organizations, when it's not a small organization, when you have the resources and you have the pipelines of develop deployment, you also have a branch where you separately have the sort of pending changes and the live reports. First, you test the pending changes on the dev environment, and only then you pass it to the live environment. All right. Well, seems like we don't have any questions right now. So I hope that was interesting for you guys. I hope that you managed to learn something new and most importantly, useful. That's the most important thing. Unless it was useful, learning something new is kind of fun, but what's the point of it? Useful is the most important metric here. And of course, I would highly appreciate if you could also fill in the feedback form. You don't have to write an essay there. There's a few different, few small little questions that we want you to answer to understand whether or not this is doing good or bad, and whether or not we need to focus on something else. Yeah, if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us, and I'll see you in the top 5 announcement. Thank you for your attention, guys, and good luck. Bye, everyone.